Bond was denied for the man accused of killing a nursing student over the weekend.
21-year-old college student Muna Pandey. 51-year-old Bobby Shaw has been charged with capital murder.
1-year-old college student from Nepal, 51-year-old Bobby Shaw, is charged with capital murder.
On Monday, the 26th of August, a body was found at the Reserve at 63 apartments off West Airport Boulevard in Houston, Texas. The deceased body was that of 21-year-old Nepalese international student Muna Pandey. A nursing student had migrated to the United States in the hopes of a better life, a hope that was cut short by someone who wasn't exactly a stranger to her. Muna Pandey was a native of Nepal, and it was studies that brought her almost halfway across the globe to America, where she enrolled at Houston Community College. Muna had left her small town in Nepal with high hopes of becoming a nurse, a profession she had been passionate about since childhood. Moving to the US wasn't easy, and she had to adjust to a new culture, a different education system, and the loneliness that often comes with being away from home. But despite all these challenges, she was determined to succeed and provide a better life for her family back in Nepal. Muna was a sweet girl. Her neighbors never had any complaints about her being rowdy, and you could tell that nobody could ever possibly have an issue with her. She was from a stereotypical college girl. She had a lot going on for herself, and she kept to herself a lot of the time. The downside of Muna's lifestyle was that it seemed to attract stalkers. In 2022, she noticed someone lurking at her door and windows when she was alone in her apartment. This was particularly frightening for her, living alone in a foreign country. Whenever these incidents occurred, she called the police, careful never to get close enough to identify the stalker. Muna was haunted by the thought of what could happen if her stalker ever broke in before the police could help. But there was someone she could find solace in, despite the unsettling reality of being stalked. And that was her neighbor, Dipendra Kunwar. Dipendra was also a young Nepalese living in Houston, Texas, close to where Muna stayed. Although he wasn't related to her in any way, he was like a big brother, and she was like a little sister to him. Muna trusted Dipendra not only because they were from the same country, but also because they knew each other back home. He was like family to her. So when Muna realized she was being stalked, she immediately turned to Dipendra, who quickly offered a solution to help her. When Dipendra learned her friend was getting stalked, it was his idea for Muna to have a security camera installed. He even helped do the installation for her. That way, she could know the identity of the person who wouldn't leave her alone. Almost as if the stalker knew about the new security measure added to her house, Muna hasn't had any unwanted visitors since then. But there were still some daring individuals lurking around. Sometime in early August, Muna had a visitor in the late evening. It wasn't any of her college friends. What made it even more terrifying was the fact that he was with a gun. It was clear as day that this was a man with murderous intent. But by the time Muna realized that it was too late, he was already in her apartment and she was at his mercy. Muna would not be seen again until 2 days later, and when she was found, it was in the most odd of fashion. Staff at the apartment building where Muna resides got a call that they should check for a dead body at a specific room number. The person who called couldn't be traced since they hid their caller ID. But the specific room number they reached out to have checked belonged to Muna. And when they did go to check, they found her, deceased, and her body littered with bullet holes. And the corpse wasn't fresh. This was a horrifically shocking sight to see. She had a bullet hole at the back of her head, meaning that her murderer made sure he was thorough with his deed. The eeriest part of this gruesome act was that the apartment door was not locked. This meant several things, but most chilling of all, Muna's killer may have been someone very close to her who knew her very well. This was most likely not reported sooner because there was nobody to hear the gunshots or possibly screams as she struggled for her life. The fact that Muna lived a very secluded life, devoid of frequent visitors, didn't help matters either. Since Muna had been found but not alive, the next question everybody was asking was, who was responsible for the death? He would probably be lurking still at large. But there was one thing he didn't know. Eyes were watching him. Muna's security camera, which her friend Dipendra had installed, caught the whole sequence of events that happened. Apparently, the camera footage shows Muna entering her house with shopping bags while being tailed by a man with a gun pointing at her. About an hour later, the man can be seen leaving her apartment with one of her bags. This footage coincides with loud thumping noises that neighbors heard in the apartment block at the time. The footage was able to capture a bald man with white facial hair. This was the first and only suspect in Muna's murder. The investigation that followed Muna's murder was complex. Detectives worked tirelessly to analyze the footage from the security camera, but they didn't stop there. Investigators canvassed the apartment complex and surrounding area, interviewing neighbors and cross-referencing witness reports. It was the tip from the restaurant owner that truly set the investigation in motion. In such cases, law enforcement often relies on local knowledge and community cooperation to bring justice, and this case was no different. It was the combined efforts of police work and the Houston community that brought Bobby Singh Shah to light. But this wasn't just any restaurant. It was one where Muna had previously worked. And this seems not to be a coincidence, but that wouldn't be the only time that Shah was recognized. A woman rang the police to tell them that she also knew Shah. But it wasn't the fact that she knew him that was shocking. It was where she knew him from. The woman alleges that she knew Shah over a decade ago from a sugar daddy dating website. This piece of information shows that Shah is the type of person to be found with younger women. With all the information they needed, police were able to make an arrest of the middle-aged man. He wasn't granted the option of bond and has been awaiting trial. If the jury were to find him guilty, he would be charged with capital murder, making him liable to face capital punishment. While investigations were going on, her friends and neighbors had turned her apartment door into a memorial for her, where they wrote sweet messages and dropped flowers for her, while her friends and colleagues were mourning her passing. The Nepal Association of Houston had contacted Muna's mother to inform her of the tragic news. As bereaved as she was, she found it comforting to know that the man who took her only daughter's life is in the custody of the police and would soon face justice. Sympathizers even opened a GoFundMe so that Muna's mother could come over to Houston for Shah's case. The identity of Muna's killer is not a mystery, but there are so many things that still are, such as her connection with Shah. Bobby Singh Shah wasn't an unknown figure. In fact, he had been on the radar of local law enforcement before, but for lesser offenses. Shah had a troubling history of volatile relationships and questionable behavior. While no prior charges of violence had ever been filed against him, those who knew him spoke of a man who had difficulty controlling his temper. Coupled with his appearance on sugar daddy websites, it paints a disturbing picture of a man who preyed on vulnerable young women. Dipendra recounts that Muna never told him of any Shah before this, and if she trusted anybody enough to tell about who she was seeing or romantically involved with, it would be him. But he did not know Shah. But he can rest assured that it was the cameras he helped install that led to the arrest of Muna's killer. But perhaps neither did Muna. The fact that her killer was a regular on dating sites and frequently ate at the restaurant she worked at suggests that he might have been stalking her. For all anybody knows, the initial stalker that made Dipendra install the security cameras for Muna in the first place might have been Shah. Given how she was murdered, Muna was not a random target of Shah's. But even with all this going on, other questions are raised. Why Muna? Had he done this to other young girls? And if it wasn't for her security cameras, who would have been Shah's next target? Muna had bought a car for herself, paid for her apartment, and was set to graduate in a semester. Surely after graduation, she was going to land a job and retire her parents. She didn't have everything about her life figured out, but she was doing well by any stretch of the imagination.